Hello, everyone. I have captions, special captions. That's wonderful. Hello, welcome everybody to .NET Live. This show is to empower all the .NET community and beyond about whatever you can say. This is totally unscripted, live. It's a bit chaotic, but we love it that way. So I'm Frank Boucher, and I will be your host today, but I'm not alone. With me, I have David Pine and Scott, Addie. Hello, guys.
Hello.
And today we have two guests. Pretty happy about that. So we have Sander, who I met before.
I'm sure you've remembered.
Yeah, I remember, totally. And Jerry. Hello, Jerry.
Frank, it's nice to meet you.
That I never met before. And I believe the topic of the day is I love that project, so I'm very happy to be part of this episode. It will be a DataAPIBuilder, or the DAB. Am I right?
Correct. Yes, 100%.
And before we jump into the topic, would you like to introduce yourself and Sander first, maybe, and after that Jerry, and then after that whoever's supposed to be starting the talk. Just
sounds good. Sounds great. So my name is Brinke. I'm a Microsoft MVP. I live in the Netherlands. I work as a software consultant. I do a lot of .NET, a lot of Azure. Basically, I always say I do everything except for CSS. And yeah, I'm really happy to be here today to talk about DataAPIBuilder. I think I discovered that project around maybe like a year and a half ago or something like that. I think when it was kind of in alpha or beta, and I just was really fascinated by it because it was just really fun. Started talking about it, started blogging about it, and yeah, it's just really fun to be here and to have Jerry with me to talk about DataAPIBuilder today.
How about you, Jerry? Do you want to share a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, I'd love that. One of my favorite topics is me, so that's perfect.
Very, very humble.
Oh man,
I love it.
Honesty starts somewhere. And so anyway, guys, no, the truth is I've been at Microsoft now 15 years, but the first 8-9 years of my career here was developer evangelism. So it's always been reaching out to developers and sort of understanding the different friction points and problems in adoption that they have. And so it's been sort of love affair sounds so stupid sounding, but it's crazy how it just feeds my passion to teach and to learn myself as well. I'm a computer science professor here in Denver, and I'm the PM for DataAPIBuilder. So if there is anybody to talk about DataAPIBuilder, I think I'm a pretty good choice. DataAPIBuilder itself is about 3.5 years old, started by Davide. So Davide Marie gets kind of the good credit for being the godfather of DataAPIBuilder, and it has evolved to a point today where, it is a compelling option to add to any solution that uses a database on the back end, for sure. So I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Oh, I know already it will be a great episode. So chat, if you have any question, feel free to ask your question in the chat. We'll let go those two guys start what they have to share, and we'll kind of interrupt them when we feel appropriate with your questions. So be patient if you see we don't immediately answer or ask your questions, but fill that chat because we won't question. It's a community show. So yeah, let's go.
All right. So I'll be sharing my screen here. So my plan for today is to do a couple of slides, talk to you about DataAPIBuilder, do some very fun demos as well, and let's just kind of get started to talk about DataAPIBuilder. We already did this right in the introduction. So Sonnet Brinke, Jerry, Nixon, of course, the rest of the cast here that's going to help us today. So it's absolutely wonderful. So let's just kind of skip over and go immediately to what DataAPIBuilder is. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that, Jerry, because I have my own opinion, but maybe you would be the best person to ask here.
Yeah, that'd be great. I talk about it a lot, so I've got you interrupt me because I'm paid by the word, and I like it.
All right, I'll try.
I think Sandra, if you're building an application, it's ridiculous to think about an application that doesn't have a database on the back end. Maybe if you're writing Notepad, but otherwise it doesn't make any sense. And so if you're talking directly to the database, here's the downside. If you're talking directly to the database, you need to have a database driver, right? So you need to have like Tedious if you're JavaScript, or you need just the regular SQL client if you're in .NET, or move on from there, right? Every single language has its own unique driver, and each of those drivers is in a different kind of space. Some are more than the others, some are more performant than the others, some are excellent, some release constantly, some release very slowly. And so you're kind of in this weird spot of, do I have the latest driver? Is this the right driver? And is the blog that I'm reading the right way to interact with the database? Or is there a new fancy way that I need to be doing it? So that's the second part of having it on the client. So I can now introduce a data API, and I can move all of that hardship into the data API. I haven't really solved the problem yet, but I have at least moved the problem into this kind of middle tier. So we have a 3-tier application like what you're showing on the screen, where I now have everything happening there, and my client can relax. My client is only talking over HTTP and Java and JSON, and so everything is really easy for it to do the interaction with the API. And the hard work then is between the API and the database. DataAPIBuilder steps in and says, good job separating all these things the way that you're supposed to. Good job making it so that your client doesn't need a framework or ADO.NET or the driver or anything else. Great work doing that. Now we'll take the API from here so you don't have to write it from scratch. We'll build all of your CRUD operations. We'll build it in all of security. We'll build in all of these kind of feature-rich things that you would have built if you had the engineering time and engineering budget. And that's where DataAPIBuilder comes in. It's not code generation. It just literally replaces that middle tier to make it so that you can do the CRUD operations against Microsoft SQL databases, Cosmos DB databases, MySQL, PostgreSQL. There's a SQL data warehouse, and a growing list that is on our backlog even today, so that we can make that kind of interaction with the database completely transparent, so that you can have not just senior developers building your client, but you can have junior developers like truly contributing to your client, knowing that they don't need to be SQL experts. They don't even need to know what the backend database is. They just need to know HTTP and JSON, which is, I mean, back to, I'm a professor of computer science. That's week 3. Serialization and deserialization and using the HTTP client is the first thing you can do. So you can expect for junior and mid developers to be experts at being able to interact with an API without worrying that they mistakenly write a join that's so complex it tears down your database. Instead, you let DataAPIBuilder do that instead, right? It's all inside a single container, so it's completely isolated. All you do is provide a JSON file. There you go. Did I cover
that's
the
really good? I think that's a really good description as well. So the way maybe I can add to that, the way as a developer, as a .NET developer or any kind of developer that uses APIs and databases, the way I can always look at it as well is that if I have I can have a very dumb client, I can have a very rich client, but if I'm building like a little to-do list application, like a simple inventory management app, a simple ticketing system, the API is usually going to be very CRUD based, right? So creating a ticket, updating it, deleting it, and then having to build an API like for that, and then use Entity Framework, and then use setup authentication and authorization, and all of those things, setting up the repository, the documentation, making sure your packages are updated. All of these steps to me are very, very boring, right? And I don't really want to be doing that, which is really fun, because that's kind of where DataAPIBuilder entered my life, to be very dramatic here. So
Sander, let me agree with you. Not only is that code boring, but the more boring the code is and the more repetitive, the more likely we're going to have an error in it, right? Because we're just like, let's just get it done.
Yeah, exactly. You're just copy pasting everything, and then at some point it's wrong. And it's just really, like, I always tell people, like, you want to focus on the interesting stuff, right? You want to build the interesting applications. You don't want to constantly plumb the same thing. Sometimes it's kind of fun to turn your brain off and just do that kind of thing, but it's not something that you probably want to work on like day to day. So I think like a year and a half ago during Hacktoberfest at work, we had a little event, and some people on my team were working on like a little leaderboard application, and I was working on some other thing. And they were like, so Sander, could you maybe help us out? Because we need an API to store this leaderboard data. And none of us, we're all front-enders. None of us here have knowledge. And I was like, well, something on LinkedIn I read about DataAPIBuilder, and they tried it out, and it worked like fantastically for them to replace this API in like a few minutes of work to set it up with DataAPIBuilder, because you can use REST, you can use GraphQL. It was just kind of the light bulb moment, like, oh my gosh, this exists, and it was really, really nice to use.
So we do have lots of questions already coming in because people are like, wait, what? This thing exists? You can use it now? Like, what is it? So I'll bring up some of the questions here. So
let's go.
Live from Twitch. Our first question is, I watched a video about DAB for the first time during the week of .NET Conf. So do you think that DAB fits into a distributed system?
Go ahead, Sanders.
All right, so I think, and I hope the PM agrees with me. So if we're talking like distributed, I feel like we're talking a little bit like microservices style and that kind of stuff. So if we're thinking about that and how we could deploy DataAPIBuilder in such an environment, I think it definitely is a good fit for it. As in, we can deploy DataAPIBuilder as a Docker image, we can deploy it into Kubernetes, for example. You can scale it from 1 instance to 500. There's multiple ways to also do caching and other thingies. I think it is a really good fit. The only thing that I always tell people to be careful of is, do not replace your very custom payment API with DataAPIBuilder, because that's not the goal here, right? That's what I'm always telling people. But I think for lots of organizations, DataAPIBuilder can definitely help for the smaller, simple, well, not smaller or simple, but I'm trying to say the data APIs can simply be replaced with DataAPIBuilder.
When you
look at a normal data API, at least 90% of it's the repetitive code, right? That doesn't mean it's zero custom code.
Exactly.
One thing that nobody mentioned that I think it's important also is DataAPIBuilder is open source.
Ooh, that's a really good point as well, actually. So let me actually forward one slide and just kind of have some more things on the page to talk about here. So
there it is.
So there you go. So one thing that I think it's really important for people to realize is when you talk about DataAPIBuilder, people often question me, so where's the code? Show me the code. Where's the code that it outputs? That's not the case, right? So it's a tool. It's not a framework. It's not a library. Before the show started, we're actually talking about integration with Aspire, if you want something really cool and using it kind of, as a library in an Aspire project, I guess, but it's really cool. But it's something that you start up, you configure it to talk to databases, and it will at runtime then create the endpoints for you, for both for REST and both for GraphQL. I think that's something that people need to kind of to understand understand DataAPIBuilder.
So it creates both implicitly, or do you have to configure both, or how
Or you mean REST and GraphQL you're talking about?
Yeah. I'm curious.
So out of the box, I believe that when you just configure a new DataAPIBuilder file, or configuration file, I think it just supports both out of the box, right? REST and GraphQL.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, they're enabled by default, so you get REST and Graph both simultaneously, and you have to disable them if you don't want them. So if you're a development team and you've standardized on REST, but you want to dabble in REST or in GraphQL, it's an easy way to do that because you can get everything you want in REST and then start to use Graph a little here and there. And if you're standardized on GraphQL and you want to do it, and you know that some things are just better REST, you can have the best of both worlds. You don't have to choose between them.
I can't tell you how long I've tried figuring out how to write the server side implementations of exposing a REST not a REST. REST is simple, I think, but the GraphQL endpoint, it's not fun. So that I'm sold. This is amazing.
No, especially if you're doing nested resolvers and things like that. All of a sudden you're like, oh, that needs the context of that other thing that I didn't know was there when I first wrote it. Yeah.
And then so there was another question earlier from YouTube here. They're asking, is it also able to be used with an entity framework DB context? And I think that might be a misconception, right? Because
not really. Yes, technically it is a misconception, right? So this goes back to that point of it being a tool. In the next slide, I'm gonna kind of introduce it, or the next 2 slides, I'm gonna introduce how you start doing it. But the question itself is actually a really good question. So there is a community member, Eric. So he creates the EF Core Power Tools. And he actually created he integrated DataAPIBuilder into the EF Core Power Tools. So if you have EF Core set up in your project, with
he is such a productive engineer. God,
he is so cool.
Build.
Exactly. So what you can do is you can just use Entity Framework Power Tools. It's an extension for Visual Studio. I'm not sure if it exists for VS Code, but I know it exists for Visual Studio. And then with like 2 clicks, you can just generate a data API builder configuration file based on your EF core context.
So really, this is all about building an API that sits on top of your insert data source.
Exactly. Okay. So we have some tables, and then we want to expose or views or store procedures. It also works like for Cosmos DB, right? So NoSQL approaches are also supported. And this will then generate API endpoints based on your table definitions or views or store procedures. Exactly.
So why is anyone writing APIs anymore at this point?
Boom! There's the question of the day right there. Exactly. I can tell you why, because they're paid by the hour. That's exactly the reason to do it.
We got another question here from YouTube. It's a quick one. So they're trying to wrap their head around it. They're asking, is Data API Builder akin to Firebase and Supabase?
I feel like these people are being paid because these are all the same things that I always talk about on this slide. So they're really good questions. Why don't you go ahead, Jerry?
No, please. If you already talk about it, go to your talking points.
Sure thing. So my talking points. So what I usually, that's one of the things I talk about here is like the vendor lock-in of thingy, because these tools, like Data API Builder is not the first tool on the market here. Like it is kind of comparable to Firebase. That kind of has, you store data somewhere and then Firebase kind of API-ifies it for you. So you can use the Firebase API to access your data. There's also things like Postgres and Hasura, I believe. Those are very much Postgres only, where this is like multi-database supported. The thing with Firebase is that it is, kind of locked into the Google system. Whereas with Data API Builder, you can use this in Azure, but you can also use this on-prem. You can use this on the Google Cloud. You can use this anywhere you want. Like it is a tool, it's open source. It is, it is not limited to the Microsoft or Azure platform, which I think is really one of its core
container, like, just like creating the container, you could really run it anywhere, right?
Anywhere. And you made the point earlier, Frank, that this is open source. There's no trick to the license. There's no special like tier that you get premium, whatever. Everything is right here. So if you run this in the Google Cloud and you want to use this as your API over some database you have running there, fine. We don't care. Run it in AWS. Run it on-prem. Please run it in Azure, right? I mean, I'm not saying don't run it in Azure.
I love that.
We don't care where it runs. And there's not like extra hooks that makes it incompatible with other clouds. I mean, it's absolutely ready to go wherever you are. By the way, when you were talking, David, about how it's hard to write, or it's a pain, better to say, to write these resolvers and keep them all in sync. So we dynamically create every resolver. And so even if you have them nested, so it's this dot, this dot, this dot, this, we build all of those and maintain the context through all of them too. So we basically take the heartache and make it so it's automated. The best part though is that you can have 2 resolvers inside a single operation inside GraphQL. So that just like what Sander was saying, we support NoSQL, but we also support regular old relational databases too. Yeah. And so in a single query, you could pull back data that is NoSQL and relational at the same time in a single payload, as if they were all the same. So that's a really unique and awesome thing to be able to do. By the way, we can point to data sources that are in the cloud and on-prem at the same time too. So if you had, let's say it's Cosmos DB in the cloud, but you had SQL running locally, in a single query and a single payload back to you, you can get back a unified hybrid query of not just hybrid types, but also hybrid location data as well. I mean, it's freaking crazy.
This is insane. So like, I'm thinking in my head here, because like I was obviously aware of Entity Framework and how amazing that project is. And like you can have an ORM that sits over top of your data source. Great. It does like migrations and all that stuff. And it models it and it makes it simple so that you don't have to work with like ADO.NET and all those things. It abstracts it away. And then we've had for the longest time ways to generate HTTP clients, for endpoints that would, you'd point to like an endpoint. So now this is like the part in between that where like we can have Entity Framework, we can have API Builder, and then we can have generated clients. And then it's like, well, our job is just the front end or the consumers of these things. And then we get, 3-tier architecture across. Like, this is incredible. My mind is
and it's a stateless API, which means you could scale this horizontally as far as you can imagine, and you could scale this vertically as big as you want. And so it's not like you have to do it our way. If you have teeny tiny little, microservices, like Data API could not be a better choice. If you have a gigantic API, so we have customers that have 600 unique endpoints, each configured permission-wise differently.
Yeah.
And like, great, that's just one container for them. We have other customers who have just a handful of endpoints, and they have at least 16 containers provisioned so that they can scale horizontally and just handle burst loads. So it's just kind of up to you because it's stateless. It's just so easy to use. And it just does it all. Like, it's just crazy to say. It's just nuts how good it is. And we're 3.5 years into building this. We're way past will this work, right? It is so awesome. And so I was just talking to a Microsoft customer, a very, 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 very large retailer, and they have an internal drive. They have two things. They have an internal emerging corporate standard that nobody can talk to the database directly anymore. So they must build data APIs. And so they see this as an engineering work that they have to accomplish. And they're like, wait a minute, Data API Builder we can have all this solved by lunch, and this will be a really nice solution. They already know how to orchestrate all of their containers. And so that's not even part of the story. They're happy to make it so they can have each container isolated, and it takes the connection string away from the developer. It takes inside the connection string is the timeout setting. Inside the connection string is whether or not certificates are trusted, right? All of these things that you're like, golly, it's on the freaking client. Like, what if we just took it out, dropped it in a data API, and made it so that every developer now building line of business applications can have all the features they want, just not touch all the important stuff anymore. And so that's the first thing they're doing. And they also have this other thing where they are in this nightmare world of drivers becoming out of date. And so after a certain amount of time, they're not supported, or they have security flaws or whatever. All of that gets erased when you have a centralized API.
I feel like I've been living under a rock for the last 3.5 years. Like, how did I not know?
Where have you been? What's happening?
I don't know. This is.
Have you heard of this? Have you heard of this AI thing, by the way? Like, I think that's going to be a big thing.
I think that's my problem, as I've been 2 heads down with that. But we actually have some support questions coming in. This is a good one.
David,
let's take a few questions, but after that, let's go also speed up so we can see some code. The chat has been very patient. But,
So we got a question here from YouTube. Does it support real-time data sources?
What do you think they mean by real-time, David?
I'd imagine like SignalR or something.
I feel like
maybe I don't know. I don't know. That's a good question. Maybe if they could clarify in the chat here, like how would you define real-time data sources?
Yeah, just ask the question again. Simon, ask it twice.
And then we got another one here from Patrick. Does it support Snowflake as a
Good question, Patrick. Let me answer that. So I would say the two top requests of backend data sources that we do not support today, but we want to support, are Oracle and Snowflake. So the answer is no, we don't support it right now. It really is limited today to Postgres, Cosmos DB, every flavor of Microsoft SQL you can imagine, and MySQL.
But it's open source, so maybe jump in there, help out, right?
That's a really 100%
cool. So that's right. The reason we support SQL Data Warehouse today is because of a contribution. Yeah, absolutely right.
Oh, wow. That's really cool. So that, like you said, are there more questions, or shall we move on to some of the...
Move on.
Yeah, let's move on.
So a cool thing that you said, like open source community contributions. So Data API Builder is built on a lot of open source components. Like, I believe it uses ASP.NET Core for the APIs. I believe it uses Hot Chocolate for GraphQL. It uses Fusion Cache for its caching support. And the creator of Fusion Cache, I think, is Jody. His first name is Jody. I'm forgetting his last name now. I'm so sorry. But he has actually been working on adding extra level 2 caching support to Data API Builder because it uses his library. And that's a really cool thing about, who's the best guy you can get for, implementing that. But it's the guy that actually creates the library that DAB is using. So these kind of open source contributions are really valuable. So a couple features, whenever I think of these kind of tools, they need to have a lot of features, to replace the API I would have otherwise built custom, because you want to have a lot of things out of the box. Things like filtering, sorting, pagination, authentication, and caching. To me, auth is always an annoying thing to build, and this is just really easy in Data API Builder. Just built-in Open API with Swagger UI. I'm a really big Open API fan. I've blogged about it a lot on my website, and this is just supported as well. A GraphQL playground, and on the right side on the screen, there's things that we've already talked about. So let's continue. And let's talk a little bit about how it works, just very quickly. So correct me if I'm wrong, Jerry, but kind of to simplify what we're saying here is basically all you need if you're using like a relational database, you're configuring it with a configuration file in JSON, and then you're providing a relational schema. So you're providing a connection string to your database. And this will at runtime kind of be converted into endpoints, and this will output REST methods with REST endpoints and GraphQL schemas as well. And then you can also use if you're using a NoSQL approach with like Cosmos, you need to give it a GraphQL schema to create types for, and then you're just you can get started. So how do you then actually get started? So let's finish this slide. Tell everyone how you install DataAPIBuilder, how you can easily get started with it, and then I'll move on to a little demo. So we need to install it. So there's multiple ways to do this. For development purposes, I personally really like this approach where we just have the .NET CLI and we install the Microsoft DataAPIBuilder tool. In this case, we install it globally. Then we can call dab init, so initialize a new DataAPIBuilder configuration file. In this case, we're configuring it for Microsoft SQL Server, but we can do multiple database types as well. We're passing in a connection string. I choose to do the @env to pass in to pass it in from an environment variable or .env file for security reasons, of course. Now we're almost there. So now we're saying DataAPIBuilder, please add the book entity, because by default, DataAPIBuilder exposes nothing because it's a secure tool to use. So now we're telling it, hey, create endpoints for this book endpoint when you start up. The source is the books table, and the permissions are anonymous star. So this is like the permission and authentication system. So for now, I'm saying anyone without being logged in or authenticated can do anything. So you could also do authenticated or custom roles that are present in your token. And the star you could replace with like create, read, update, delete, and stuff like that. Now we start it up, and I think milliseconds, right, Jerry? Like something like that.
Yeah, I mean, back to that customer who had 600 endpoints, it takes them 25 seconds to load, but still, that's insanely fast.
That is still very fast, I think.
Yeah.
At least for everything that it does for you. And now we're done. So here we can say curl, and we can perform a request to like localhost 5000 API/books or something like that. And this will now, in JSON, return the books that we've stored in the database. And this would have saved us a lot of time, especially for the authentication system, in my opinion, building this all yourself.
For sure.
All right.
And today we are, of course, the focus is .NET, but it works with any languages.
Yeah, if you are a Java shop, you can use this. If you are, I don't know, a Rust shop or a Go or whatever, this will fit right into your alley. Like this is no reason why you can't use this in any other language type. Okay,
we are all .NET lovers here, but just want to
exactly. So I'll quickly go to my browser and show you.
I have a question on that. So sure. We say you don't have to be a .NET developer, but here we're installing a .NET global tool. Is there an equivalent in, say, NPM, like a global package you could install if you're a Node developer?
I like it. That's a good question.
The only reason you need the CLI is if you want it to help you build the connection or build the configuration file, or if you want to host it not in a container. So if you are a not .NET developer, and let's just say there's no way I'm going to install the .NET tooling on my machine,
right?
Then I can run everything through a container in the same way that the community toolkit for Aspire uses it. So I have the same options. I just don't have the kind of the simple, I'm hosting it right here locally using the CLI. Right. So the answer is no. That's me dancing around it. But the need for it is really only if you need help building that configuration, or you just want to host it locally without using a container. So if you don't have Docker, then no big deal. Then you can use the CLI and we'll host it for you. If you do have Docker, you may actually prefer it there.
So maybe to add to that, you could also just download the executable for DAB and maybe add that to your path. And of course, like an NPM wrapper would be nice, but I feel like that's still a way to use it. Or does it then still need at runtime need .NET to run if you just download the CLI from GitHub?
Well, no, it's not a self-contained exe, so you would want.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, okay. Got you. Okay, I understand. All right.
Like on my personal machine I run without the CLI, so I'm running in a container, and every time I need to modify my configuration, I just open that JSON file and change what I have to change, and then like I run it inside a container.
Right.
By the way, when you make that change, we hot reload the entire engine. So if it's up and running and going, even inside a container, or you're hosting it locally, and you make some sort of change to that configuration file, we hot reload the entire piece of the engine that you changed. Not the entire engine. It's not a stop and restart. But in the same way that .NET can hot reload portions of the code that you write, we can hot reload portions of the configuration, the JSON file that you provide.
Yeah,
exactly. That adds a lot. It shortens the loop, right? Makes it so that inner loop is as quick as possible.
I love
Awesome.
that.
All right. So
yeah,
the demo
it's
that we're
amazing.
going to...
I mean, we can all just agree. It's amazing.
It is really cool. We should just
It's
stop here and let
crazy.
people... I like how much you love your job, Jerry. I'm really excited. I really love how much you love it. So the demo for today, it's going to be it's going to be a library demo, right? So we're going to have books and authors can write books. And then books, in this case, will be retrieved using the REST endpoints, and the authors are actually retrieved using the GraphQL endpoints. So to prove that, if I can just quickly go here and reload this page, go here, you can see that we are retrieving
I
the
cannot
authors.
Well, okay, now it's better.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm zooming in, right? So we're performing a GraphQL query. For people that aren't familiar with GraphQL, it's like kind of the opposite of REST, where REST determines the data you are returned on the server, whereas with GraphQL, you can write a query on the front end. Then you can specify exactly what properties you want and what properties you don't want, which is very useful for like under and over fetching problems, right? So we can say, I want all the authors with their ID, their name, and their birth dates, and also their image URL. And now I could, for example, load their details, and you can see that it actually, and this is something called relationships in DataAPIBuilder, where we're retrieving the author, but also the books that they've written with their image, their title, and the publication date. Right, so this is a little demo, and we can now also have authentication. So we can like log in, so we can now be authenticated, or we can be an admin. Why is that useful? Because I could zoom in a little bit. We can try to delete a book, but you can see that we're going to get a 403, deleting book failed. We can then try to be an admin. Perhaps we can delete, we're not going to delete either of these two. Let's delete Red Rising. Let's delete Pierce Brown. And as you can see now, this is all really simple because we're using the simulator authentication mode. So just any header I pass in for authentication will work. It's really useful for local development. So
let me jump in and point out what's going on here. So we accept from a JOT token all of the claims that are provided through intra ID or some sort of custom whatever auth you've got. Yep. We'll accept your JOT token and parse out your claims. You're able to put those claims on each individual item. So he can delete, for example, here a book, but he could have just as easily made it so the type of user, that admin, couldn't delete an author, right? So exactly. You can have permissions not just on the entire API, but you can also have it on individual items. This is a lot like row-level security inside SQL, but there are times when a developer doesn't have the ability to reach into their database and make structural changes to say, let's add row-level security, and all the DBAs are like, no. And you're like, dang it. Well, what can we do?
Exactly.
We can fake it, and we fake it securely, of course, inside the data API where you would want it to be. So we call these database policies. They can be based on the data itself, based on the user, or the entire claims payload. So there's a lot of cool stuff that we can do.
Exactly.
Okay. Is there a way, this is just kind of like a naive question here, but is there a way to query like the different access for the things without actually hitting the endpoint?
I don't think so.
Query the,
I'm like a client browser, and I want to render the UI, and I want to like specifically demonstrate that this person's able to do these things before they even try executing the command on the client side. Like that's a common thing that can happen.
Yes, excellent. So in the next round of so the answer is no, but I want to tell you how we were going to fix it, because this is a real problem. Because what happens is OpenAPI and the GraphQL schema both have this problem where they will expose the entire suite of what's available regardless of who you are. And so as you go in and you're trying to use things, you don't actually know they don't work until you try and actually execute them. And so the nice thing is you can't bypass it. They don't actually execute. The downside is you have to try it before you know. Now, odds are, as a client, you do know most of it, but there might be some of those around the edges. So we're building, or at least we have it in, let me just say it's in our backlog, so I don't mistakenly promise any sort of timeline here. But we're building both on the Open API side and on the GraphQL side, your ability to ask for based on a specific role. So the thing is, we have to come up with a way to make it so that we can, based on your role, but also based on any role, so that we can give you guidance as you're building your client. So you may be, God mode. And so you're like, hey, what can I do? And you can do everything. But you got 5 other types of roles that you're going to have in your client. And you want to be able to document each of those independently. If you document today against Open API, it'll document the entire suite and get it wrong. Being able to document it based on each role is it's going to be a big undertaking, no doubt about it. And this is a fundamental flaw of all Open API and on the graph side.
Like kind of understanding what a user would be allowed to do.
The solution to remember that these containers are free is that you could have one for every role. That's an amazingly simple way, and it kind of doubles down on just how low cost this stupid middleware is. Like, you could do anything. You could just add an API and it costs you nothing. You could use the most trivial API you want, which you might actually want anyway, because if one of your roles, for example, is executive, you might ramp up that one container to be really a great experience. So just another thing to think about. Some of these problems can be solved architecturally.
Awesome. And I just want to say that I think it's amazing that you're using code tours. All right, continue.
Awesome. Okay, let's continue. So yeah, code tours is a really useful extension that you can like make a tour throughout a code base. I always use it for my demos. There's also a different one called demo time that lots of people are using nowadays. So this people said, show me the code. So I'm going to show you the code. The fun thing is there is no code, right? It's all just a JSON file. So let's say I created like the dab init commands, and I've already changed a couple things and like added the book entity and some other things. But let's just kind of run through it. So you can edit this file by yourself because there's a JSON schema, or you can use the CLI to do everything. So first, there's the data source, right? So this is what we configured earlier, where we can say, well, I want to use Microsoft SQL Server. There's specific options for your database type, like session context. There's a connection string, which is stored in the .n file. I'm currently running this locally on Docker. The database. Then there's runtime options, right? So currently I have caching enabled just globally for any call for like any entity for 10 seconds. So that's just something easy to use. It's in memory cache, but this is something that the community member was working on for adding like distributed cache support, if I'm not mistaken, Jerry.
Yeah, you're right. This right now is only level 1. And so that's in memory cache for 10 seconds. But yeah, level 2 is when we use Redis. And so we'll have Redis support. That's right around the corner. And we're in release candidate right now.
Awesome. So then there's like the REST options, like the runtime REST options. So REST is globally enabled on this path. Request body should be strict, so it does not allow extraneous fields in the request body. And this is also that good thing about the JSON schema, that you can have some really useful autocomplete and validation. GraphQL is enabled globally.
Let me make just a quick point about that body strict. This is specifically, it should be called "Be friendly to .NET developers." That's what that line should actually be. And yeah, that's really good. And so when that's set to false, so it's actually the opposite. Be unfriendly, I guess. Gosh. Yeah. When it's set to false and it's no longer strict, what it allows you to do is use the same models or the same POCO objects that you're using to retrieve data to push data back in. So the way that a lot of APIs work is they have a very structured payload they expect for you to deliver. And if you're writing everything, like longhand inside JavaScript, that's not that big of a deal. You just don't include certain properties. But if you're a .NET developer and you have this model that you use for reading, and so it populates all the properties, and this other model you have for updating because it omits properties that aren't allowed in the payload. So the way we do it is we allow this switch to be turned off, so the .NET developers don't have to have 5 different models that they're passing forward and back. They can pass the same POCO object over and over, and
that's good. That's a good addition. Yeah,
description works. Yeah, it's really nice, and so it's easy to overlook that strict thing. And
I never looked at it that way. So yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, it's really.
I never make any mistakes. So
I added it because I'm a .NET developer and I hated having multiple models.
All right. Thank you. So host options, right? Your mode, like development and production for like extra logging and other options. authentication providers. So here's simulator. There's static web apps. There's other thingies. I think app service is like going to be a newer one. Custom simulator. Loads of things are happening.
As well as Active Directory. So in this next version, we'll rename it to Intra ID, like Microsoft did. But
right. Formerly known as. Right.
That's what it'll be in a few weeks.
Yeah, and then here you can add like JWT and then provide, if you're using a custom, if you're using like identity server or some other things, you can like provide the audience and the issuer yourself, and then support basically any modern identity server that you want. So no Microsoft vendor lock-in at all.
That's right.
Awesome. Okay. So then, and this is, I think, like the cool thing that, this is what I like a lot about DataAPIBuilder. So here we're defining our entities, which is done with the dab add command. And you can also do this via the CLI. Here we're saying, hey, there's an author entity. Please create endpoints for this. So like add, a /API/author or whatever. And here's a permission system. So here we're currently saying the anonymous role can read, right, all the rows. There's also custom, there's also row and column security as well. But here we're saying authenticated. So if the token is valid, then the user is allowed to create, update, and read data, but only people with the admin role are allowed to do anything. So they will also be allowed to delete. Yeah. And doing stuff like this with authorization policies in .NET is always a little bit of a headache and just kind of difficult to set up and figure out. But here, it's super simple.
Yeah.
And that's what I really like about it.
And it's on the entity level, right? So it's it's not a table, it's a table view or store procedure, but you can have these unique permissions for every single one of them.
So I guess as a consumer of the API, imagine I'm in .NET and I spin up an HTTP client instance. What header do I need to pass in to assign that role for the user that's attempting to access that thing? Like how do those permissions flow from the client to through the API? Because now we're looking at the JSON here, and I know that this is going to configure the container that's going to spin up and build the thing, and then it's going to have an API. Like how over here, how do I consume that?
So like how do you authenticate to the server? How do you authenticate to DAP is what you're asking.
Yeah. With that specific role. Like if I wanted the one that's So
if in your access token, so in your JWT token, there is a thing called role. I think that's pretty standardized. And and based on the value of that claim, that's what it's called, a claim, then it matches. So it's like, hey, you have a claim called admin, and then it automatically knows that you're allowed to do that.
Okay, so just standard claims.
Yeah, standard claims. So there's nothing weird going on.
Since the token's not encrypted, it's just signed, and so because of that, nobody can monkey with it along the way, and you can have that. We also have a header you can use, the X- Microsoft
Simulator API MS authenticated. I was looking at it here.
Yeah, you showed that.
MS API role for the simulator mode.
Okay.
Really good.
Love it. All right. Awesome.
All right. So
that's if you don't use struts, you still have a way.
Exactly. Well, you shouldn't use that in production, I think. Right? Or I'm not sure.
Well, you know what? You can't control what developers do.
Okay, that's true. Jerry says use it in production.
The truth of the matter is, if you're using API Manager as the front, right, it can do all the JOT operations for you, and then it can handle passing in what member you really are. So it just kind of depends on how your architecture is laid out. It's not wrong to do that. That's for sure.
So yeah, to quickly say about that, what I usually tell people as well, like DataAPIBuilder is completely able to handle all the authentication for you, as well as the authorization, right? Because it's kind of what we're doing here, and there's a lot more options. But you could also put API management, some sort of API management in front of it to handle the authentication part, and then DAB can handle the authorization for you.
I'm not familiar with the API management. Is that like what is that? So it's like UX or something?
So like, let's say we have a browser, right? And then it performs a request. And you want to have, let's see, can I draw like a DataAPIBuilder? Let's see. I don't know. Can I draw a hat? I don't know how to draw a hat, man.
Stay with code.
Yeah,
don't. Like I said, I do anything except for CSS. Hold on. Let me have a look.
Azure API Manager is a way to structure your API, David. Like
Okay,
you could
exactly.
like take a bunch of different API, reshape it, put quota on them and stuff like that. It's really,
Got
really
it.
powerful and useful. And like
There
You,
That has
you can
sense.
also manipulate the payload, so that if you're moving from, like, let's say version 3 to version 4 of your API someday,
Yeah.
you can make it transparent to all of your clients. It's a
Okay.
heck of a. But
I-
by the way, it's a service inside Azure, but it's also like a library you can just download and add. You can have a manager anywhere you go. It's
Any
really
cloud provider has API management services.
I was just trying to imagine what my evening is going to be like when I'm vibe coding. And since I know these keywords now, like we're going to have EF core, we're going to have API builder, we're going to have our refit or retro, like our HTTP client built out. And like, all I have to do is just worry about the UX. And then I can tell the AI to do that too.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, you can just, the API part is taken care of.
Yeah.
All right. So then there's the relationships. I really quickly showed off an author and their books, right? So normally an endpoint is just, I have an endpoint for books, but then if I also want the authors, that's going to be quite difficult with REST because they're just representing one entity. So here we're currently being able to use GraphQL, and GraphQL is able to go based on these relationships that we're defining here. So an author has a relationship to a book entity. So an author can have many books. Now we can use GraphQL to retrieve all of these relationships in one go. And it just makes it a lot easier to query your data. And then finally, there's the book entity as well, which is the same as the author, right? So that's kind of all there is. So this is like 75 lines of JSON that is mostly generated for you. And then you are just able to have this entire API experience, right? So in this front end, we have this entire front end, and trust me, this was a lot of work for me because I'm not a front ender, but the API part I did not have to think about at all.
As you say, so this is the front end, but I know, like, can we see the Swagger? And I see
There
it.
you go. It's all prepared for you.
And it was also a question in the chat. So like
exactly. So
it generates like everything. So Swagger is there. You will have.
Can you zoom out a little so your font is smaller?
My font is smaller?
Nah, he's messing with you, Sander.
Yeah.
Wow. So I'm just always used to having like zoom in at like 500%.
Anyway. He wants to show how big the definition is, just to say we did all that.
Right.
We did that.
I want to show how small the code really is. I mean, a very small amount of code.
It's like it's painless. You could even read it. You just kind of.
There's OData support as well. We should not forget that. And here we
hang on. Wait a minute. Hang on. Let's not say that because that's not 100% right.
So
we have a lot of the capabilities on the REST endpoints that look like OData. So we've taken great ideas like select, $select, $filter, and $order by. We have not implemented full OData. That is for sure. So this is not an OData endpoint, nor is it compatible with OData clients. And so that's important.
Okay, well that's a good correction. Thank you. I just saw this and I was like, oh, OData. But that's a good little correction to know.
That's some of the best parts of OData, to be honest. Yeah, for sure.
We have a question here from X. They're asking, is soft delete supported?
Ooh, well, you could just like do an update instead.
That's a database request, not an API request, though.
Oh yeah, you could do that. You could also do like, you could add like a filter. I guess you could like add like a row level filter, like a policy, to always say like, things that are soft deleted we don't return, or you could just do that in a view or the stored procedure. I think. You can handle that either in the database or in DataAPIBuilder.
Right.
Yeah, people are asking if this is going to be demoed at Build. They like it. They want to see it there.
Well, I think Frank is going to demo it at Build.
Yeah, he's going to be in the keynote.
Well, I think you'll have to.
I wouldn't mind doing it if someone could like over there.
Well, if you are at Build, come see me, and I will be able to talk with you about DataAPIBuilder. I love it. I use it in many of my projects. I did a few video with Jerry, so awesome. you can find it online for sure.
Awesome.
I think it's worth pointing out just technically that we automatically paginate as well. So if you do call into, because this is one of the capabilities that you could have had in OData that we also brought across. So if you're pointing to a table with 1 million records and you say select all, we automatically page for you, and we do cursor pagination so that you can go next and next and next. And regardless of how often that table is updated, you're still in the same page, so you get this expected result.
So you're telling me you solved all the hard problems already, like the stuff that like isn't fun to do.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
you know what
we do?
We do another thing where we actually, if your table is wide instead of tall, so that you have thousands of columns, that can actually cause a serious problem on your API side. And so we can both limit the number of rows that are returned to whatever it is you want, and we can also limit the amount of bytes that are returned. So not the number of columns, but the amount of bytes. And so if you're like, listen, we can't have this throughput, it's too much, we can dial that back for you as well.
What on
That's
earth
so cool.
is happening? Like, what happened? Okay, I need to ask this real quick. Time out. I need to pause this real quick. When should we not be using this? I guess that's a fair question, because I feel like I should just use this all the time.
I guess if you're using an Oracle database, until you upgrade to SQL, you're stuck with regular APIs.
Right.
That's funny.
Well,
Right.
there's some moment also where like the need of a CRUD API is not what you're looking for. This is like an API that go on top of your data. So sometimes you want something very personalized. So I would say then.
Yeah.
On SQL Server, you support also store procedure, right? I was about to say Sprout.
100%.
So you could still use very complex query, and just like if you're using SQL Server, you could still use the DAB and have a complex query return there. Is it the store procedure, or is it supported in other databases?
Yeah, and well, not all databases have store procedures.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
We support it in. Let's see. We can't support it in Cosmos because that's not a thing. We support it in Postgres, but not MySQL. So there you go. So those.
Right. Yeah.
I know it was supported in like many different databases. That
in some databases they're called triggers, so we still call it store procedure the way we support it.
All right, I've got a selfish goal here. So I see our chat; they're lighting up with this Oracle support. They really want it, and I know that they're eager to do some open source contributions. So what would that actually look like if they were to contribute to the repo? Right. Like, how much work is that to provide that sort of functionality?
It's not little. So here's another thing that we do so right now, I think somebody was talking about Hashura and some others out there that they kind of host this sort of feature functionality. You pay for it and all the other things, of course, but that regardless of that, one of the things that we are the first to do, I mean, all the way around, nobody's even like us. Like it feels good to be on the forefront of things, is inside GraphQL to be able to we could do full aggregations and group bys and having statements and all of this like very sophisticated work you may need to do. The reason we do that is because DataAPIBuilder is the underlying engine in Fabric as well. And so we need it. So a lot of the things we're like, is this big enough to scale to gigantic? Well, that question's way past for us, because we had to do that in order to be on. I mean, Fabric is the largest, data sets that we have. And so let's back up one more thing. So now we have aggregations, which is remarkable, like all the way around. However, to implement aggregations, you have to really understand that backend database. So it's not just going in and saying, can I write a select statement to Oracle and implement this? We use the provider pattern just like you guys would, right? And so you can go into and create a brand new provider called the Oracle provider, and you can start filling all of those things in for sure. And it's not going to be off the charts crazy, because we don't do anything exotic. We just build it like you would build it. However, just know that we don't treat databases like they're a file. Like, we treat them like they're a freaking database. And so it is going to be a sophisticated endeavor to say, all right, now, are we going to allow for aggregations inside Oracle? Oh, I feel like we have to. All right, well, you just bit off a much bigger piece of that apple. And so can you do it? Yeah. Is it possible? Have other people done it? Yes. Is it a big deal? Depends on what you think it's a big deal.
Yeah, well, I think one good thing to add to that as well is that recently I was kind of looking to do some open source contributions, and then I talked to Jerry, and he was like, "Hey, do DAB." And I'm like, that makes sense. So I've been actually like creating like 1 or 2 PRs for DataAPIBuilder, and I looked at the code, and it's actually surprisingly easy to go through, because it's just like using all of these open source things under the hood, right? So it's using ASP.NET Core under the hood. So if you're familiar with that, and if you can just run through the code, it's actually very understandable about what DataAPIBuilder is doing. So if you are looking to do open source contributions, or for Hacktoberfest or whatever, I think DataAPIBuilder is a really good repo to get started, because it is a really cool product. Like, Jerry has been hyping it up for so long, and I'm super excited about it as well. And it is so easy to get started with it. So yeah, I definitely recommend it.
And to bring it back to a question we had initially about the microservices, .NET Aspire support Data API Builder. Like there's an extension in the community toolkit that make it so it just
you can add it as like a
nice
component, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So you could say like
for it. Yep.
exactly.
Yeah, and Aspire is
so
built
like
for distributed applications. So does Aspire is that a good landing place for Data API Builder? Yes, it is. Yeah. Do I have to do it all by hand? Thanks to Frank, you do not. It is all built into
thanks,
the
Frank.
community tool.
I wasn't not wrong. Oh, Jerry, maybe you remember what was the other contributor? I forgot. Like I had the blank on his name.
Wasn't it Aaron? Was it Aaron Powell?
Oh,
No,
Aaron
no,
Powell. He's the owner of
the Italian guy.
Oh,
Jody.
Tommaso.
Tommaso.
Yeah.
That's what I was saying. That I told you that earlier, Frank.
I was
I
not
wish David
sure.
would
I
have
just want to make
spoken up.
sure. Like I don't want to
Just
take that. I
quietly.
don't want to say that I wrote everything. I was like,
Nobody listens to David.
I know.
Nobody.
Nobody. No, it's fine. I'm
It's
used
always
to
like
it.
that. That's all.
Let's
in all
talk
show,
about
there's,
Tommaso
like,
for like
something.
1 second. He is an extremely very good contributor. I will say
yeah.
he has helped to make sure that we have full open telemetry support now inside Data API
True.
Builder as well, both on the REST and the GraphQL side. So as 1.5, which is still in RC, comes out, we will announce that we have full open telemetry support with custom traces all throughout as well. I mean, it's pretty freaking awesome.
Love that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of goodness. I mean, I think when Sandra was making the point that we wanted to add level 2 capability for our cache. So we have the Fusion Cache author help us contribute it. I mean, he's written 80% of the code. And so like that is the best way to do it. When we needed aggregation support inside GraphQL, we go to Michael, the owner of Hot Chocolate, who makes all of the capabilities for GraphQL and .NET. And we worked out the syntax together with him, and he helped us implement it. I mean, it's just, we've done everything the way you would want it to be done, right? It's not in a basement closet, slide the pizza under the door. We really are.
But how it's done at Microsoft. No.
I love it.
That's super cool. Could we quickly share my screen again so I have some more resources for the community as well?
Yep. Awesome.
So I quickly wanted to maybe quickly add one more thing to what's been said already. I saw some questions in the chat about having APIs next to Data API Builder. Kind of adds up on a point that I always like to tell people, where you could also build something where you could say like, hey, I want to use Data API Builder, but when I create a new book entity, I want to run some custom code. And how do I do that? Because at the moment, as far as I know, Jerry, you cannot really add custom code to Data API Builder. So not yet. Oh, so here we go. So then normally what I recommend people up till now is then, hey, you could have some cool architecture where we're having like calls go to some API management, and like 99% of the calls that we're usually building APIs for are just GET operations. It can just be handled by Data API Builder, and any special calls that need custom code could maybe go to an Azure function or an AWS Lambda, because we're not Azure limited here, and that could just contain the few lines of code necessary to do the custom code, and then we can go back into DAP, or we can do something else, so we can talk to the database. So then we can kind of perhaps build an architecture where 99% of the code is just handled by DAP, and the actual interesting business logic is written in a serverless way. You're not saying you have to do this, but it is something that I feel like, hey, this is a way that we could still extend DAP with custom code currently and have a really, really like low amount of maintenance as well.
Love that. Awesome. Well, we are at the top of the hour.
Wait, David, before you say the next word.
I'm not saying anything.
Can I give you a 45-second demo of the tooling inside Visual Studio Code? It will take no time.
Oh, those extensions you wrote. Yeah, that's cool.
It'll transform your experience all the way around.
Let's do it. Let me see.
Okay. All right. Here it is. So wait, my screen. Said that one.
Oh, I did it. Someone's.
Oh, he's stretching. He's getting ready for it.
Someone's fighting. All right, there we go.
Let's see if I can do it fast enough. Okay, so inside, I have it installed. It's the Omnibus, Omnibus. I forgot to pull that up. So this is the Data API Builder extension. It's actually a bunch of extensions added together that'll give you all these capabilities. But let me show you what it does. It inside an empty folder, for example, I can initialize, which is the same CLI command you would have before, and it asks so I could store it inside an env file. That's just the environment variable file. And once I give it the connection string, so this is the SQL. Once I give it the connection string, It creates the initial configuration file, moves the connection string into an env folder for me, and makes it so that when I right click on that, I can add whatever tables are inside the associated
That's so
database.
cool.
Wow.
Right?
All right.
Once that's built, I just right click and say start, and then the endpoint spins up. I can go to, here it is, it's at 5,000.
Get out of
On a
here.
Yeah, that was
browser.
literally like 15 seconds to do
then I go
something that would normally take so long.
API/ACPOR, and then pulls back
Boom.
the data, right?
What is happening? All right, Jerry, your demo was way better. No, I'm
And
joking.
it's not a database about Star Trek. What's happening?
This is my Star Trek database. It's William Shatner. This is Captain Kirk.
Someone was
The one thing
asking
you
for
can
the
do
Star
that's
Trek reference.
unusual
Yeah,
in these
yeah.
extensions is you can visualize it too. So I go and create an on-the-fly mermaid
Oh,
diagram
okay,
so that you can see all the tables and the relationships between them, and if you have views and stored procedures too. So it's pretty groovy. It's just groovy,
That
man.
is so
I'm telling
cool.
you.
That is so cool.
And voila, there you have it.
There you go. That's my 45-second demo, and it's those extensions. They cost money. That's the only thing that actually costs. I'm kidding. Everything is free.
You had me there for a second.
Yeah. It's $100 per.
Feel free
goes
to
right
put
to
in your
me.
credit card information after the download. Exactly.
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
Nah,
that
they're
was a
free.
great episode. Thank you all for being with us today. It was fantastic. I think we all learned a lot about Data API Builder. It's an open source project. We'll make sure the few links are back in the description or comments so you could start your DAB adventure right away. And join us next week because we'll be receiving Jody Donetti to talk about, it's a follow-up episode about everything cache.
Yeah, that's the guy that
1
worked
year
on the
later.
caching here. That's the guy that worked on Fusion Cache for Data API Builder. That's a really cool follow-up. Yeah.
Awesome.
Excellent
Perfect.
follow-up episode. So there it is. So have a good week, everybody, and see you next time. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
See you guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.